All right, so get this. We're going to deep dive into the most recent Iowa polls, and, well, let's just say things are getting interesting.
Interesting is one word for it.
We're taking a look at the Des Moines Register / Mediacom Iowa poll, which, is known for being pretty accurate.
Yeah.
And these results are, well, they're raising some eyebrows, to say the least.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Iowa, a state that is historically leaned, well, Republican, is showing a potential upset.
With Kamala Harris leading Donald Trump.
Exactly. And this is a pretty significant shift from earlier polls. So it's definitely worth a closer look. What might be driving this change?
So, yeah, let's break down the numbers. Harris is ahead of Trump 47% to 44% among likely voters.
Okay.
Now, I know that might not sound like a huge gap, but when you consider how strongly Iowa has supported Republicans in recent elections, particularly, in 2016 and 2020, this is a pretty big deal.
Absolutely. And it really raises the question of whether Iowa is shifting back into that swing state category.
So, what's behind this shift? The poll suggests women voters, especially older women,
Right.
and independent women, are leaning heavily towards Harris. What do you make of that?
Well, it's a fascinating trend for sure. And one possible explanation is that these demographics are particularly concerned about certain issues.
Okay.
Issues like reproductive rights, the future of democracy, which have been, very prominent themes in Harris's campaign.
Right. And the poll features a quote from Linda Marshall, who is a 79-year-old voter. She cast her absentee ballot for Harris.
Oh, wow.
And she specifically mentioned liking Harris's policies on reproductive health and the rule of law. She even went so far as to say, I think that she will save our democracy.
Wow. That's a powerful statement. And it's not just older generations either.
Right.
The poll also highlights Maya Williams, an 18-year-old, a first-time voter. She's really excited about the prospect of electing the first Black female president.
Yeah.
And, she also cited Harris's stance on abortion rights. And she really likes that Harris opposed those changes that Trump made to overtime rules.
So it seems like there's a real sense of enthusiasm among certain demographics, for sure.
So.
And it seems like that's translating into support at the polls.
For sure. And it's not just demographics either. The poll suggests that independent voters who have historically favored Trump are now swinging towards Harris. And this shift is primarily driven by, guess what?
What?
Strong support from independent women.
Now, that's a significant finding. Why do you think independent women are moving away from Trump in this election?
Well, there could be a few different factors at play here, right? It could be that they're just dissatisfied with how Trump has handled certain issues.
Yeah.
Or maybe they're more drawn to Harris's policy positions, her leadership style. It's also possible they're responding to the broader political climate, and they're just looking for a change.
It's interesting because the poll also shows that independent men, while they still are favoring Trump, they're doing so by a smaller margin than in previous elections. So that suggests that there's some level of, uncertainty or hesitation even among his base.
Right. It seems like there's a segment of voters who are maybe less enthusiastic about Trump than they were, say, 4 years ago.
Right.
And they're open to considering other options.
Yeah, but it's not like Trump's base has disappeared. The polls make it clear that his core supporters are still very much in his corner. Men, evangelicals, rural residents, and those without a college degree.
Right. And there's even a quote in here from Joel Thunk, who's a 26-year-old Trump supporter. And, he really prioritizes the economy.
Yeah.
And he praised Trump's economic performance during his presidency.
Okay.
And he plans to vote for him again, just based on, that track record.
So we're really seeing this clear divide in the issues that matter most to each candidate's supporters. For Trump voters, it's primarily about the economy and inflation.
Yeah.
With immigration also being a significant concern.
Whereas for Harris supporters, the top priorities are the future of democracy and abortion.
Yeah.
And this difference in priorities, it could be a major factor in how the race ultimately plays out.
And here's where things get even more interesting.
Okay.
So the poll uncovered this phenomenon that they're calling the never Trump factor.
Okay.
And it turns out there's this small but significant group of voters who previously supported Trump, but now they have switched their allegiance.
Wow. So they're never Trumpers.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. And does the poll give us any insight into why this might be happening?
It does, through the story of Ralph Eubanks.
Okay.
He's a 63-year-old lifelong Republican.
Wow.
But he is voting for Harris this time around. And his reasoning is actually quite compelling. He says he became disillusioned with Trump after the 2020 Capitol riots.
Oh, okay.
And he really believes that compromise, like being able to compromise, is essential to a democracy, which he feels, is lacking in the MAGA movement.
Gotcha.
And just to clarify for listeners who might not be familiar, the MAGA movement refers to the Make America Great Again slogan.
Right.
And the associated political ideology that, well, it gained prominence during Trump's presidency.
So this is, his story really highlights the impact that those events, those riots, had on some voters and how it shifted their political views.
It's also really interesting to note that while Harris, she maintains strong support among Democrats, she's also attracting some Republicans who are willing to cross party lines.
Oh, wow.
I mean, the poll shows that 5% of Republicans actually plan to vote for her over Trump.
So that suggests that there might be like a growing segment of the Republican base that's becoming, well, disenchanted with Trump.
Yeah.
And they're looking for alternatives, even if that means voting for the opposing party's candidate.
Right.
Wow.
Okay, so we've got these pretty significant shifts in the voter demographics.
Yeah.
And a clear divide in, the priorities.
Right.
Between Harris and Trump supporters. But what about, the overall energy around each candidate? Does the poll, shed any light on that at all?
It does. It actually looks at voter enthusiasm.
Okay.
And, while both Harris and Trump have, solid support from their bases,
right,
there's a bit of a difference. 76% of Trump supporters say they are extremely or very enthusiastic about their choice.
Okay.
Compared to 71% for Harris.
That's not a huge gap, but could a 5% difference in enthusiasm actually impact, the outcome of the election?
Oh, it very well could. I mean, think of it this way, right? Enthusiasm often translates into voter turnout.
Okay.
So, those who are more excited about their candidate are more likely to actually go out and vote.
Especially in a tight race.
Exactly.
And I find it interesting that Harris's enthusiasm levels they've dipped slightly since September.
Yeah.
Is that something we should be worried about? Is that a potential red flag for her campaign?
It's something to watch for sure.
Yeah.
It raises the question. Some of that initial support that she had, is it softening as we get closer to Election Day?
Right.
It's hard to say for sure.
Okay, well, let's shift gears a bit. So the poll also highlights this really important point. Very few Iowans are still undecided.
Oh, wow.
I mean, a whopping 91% say their minds are made up.
Wow, that's huge.
That's a big jump from just 80% back in September. What does that tell us about the state of the race at this point?
Well, this is really a key takeaway. It suggests that the race in Iowa has really solidified. Both candidates have basically locked in their core support, and it's really unlikely that we'll see any major shifts in the outcome at this point.
So unless, something completely unexpected happens, it sounds like, the die is pretty much cast.
Yeah.
But this brings up a bigger question, right? If Iowa is truly becoming a swing state, what does that mean for the national picture?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? This unexpected shift in a traditionally Republican state could be a sign of a larger...
Like a trend.
Yeah, like a trend across the country. So it really forces us to consider, are we seeing, a fundamental realignment in American politics?
Wow, that's a big thought. And if that's the case, what are the potential implications for future elections? I mean, not just for the presidency, but for other races as well.
Well, it's certainly something to think about, right? I mean, could a shift in Iowa signal a potential domino effect, influencing other states and shaping the political landscape, for years to come? It's really interesting to consider.
This is getting really fascinating, and even though we're talking about these broad trends and statistics and everything, it's important to remember that every data point represents a real person.
A real person making a real choice. Yeah, absolutely. It's easy to get kind of lost in the numbers.
Yeah.
But behind each percentage point are individual voters with their own stories and motivations and concerns.
It's a good reminder that elections are ultimately decided by the cumulative effect of these individual decisions.
Exactly. And this poll, I think, highlights the importance of understanding not just, who people are voting for,
right,
but why.
Right. Why are they voting for that person?
Exactly. What issues are driving their decisions? Right. What values are shaping their choices? Yeah. Those are the questions that can really unlock, a much deeper understanding of the electorate and really the forces that are shaping, our political landscape.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. I mean, we've seen how Iowa, once a reliably, solidly red state, is now, this much tighter race. With Kamala Harris leading Donald Trump, we've explored the, potential reasons for this shift.
Yeah.
From changing demographics to evolving voter priorities. And we've even delved into this, never Trump phenomenon and the importance of voter enthusiasm. But I'm curious, what stands out to you as the most, surprising or significant finding from this poll?
What really struck me was the significant number of voters who have already made up their minds.
Okay.
I mean, that 91% figure, it's really telling. It suggests a really high level of engagement.
Yeah.
And a sense of urgency among voters.
That makes sense. Because, this election feels like incredibly consequential.
Oh, yeah.
And it seems like people are keenly aware of the stakes.
For sure.
Yeah.
And it also just reinforces the idea that, every vote truly matters.
Yeah.
Especially in a close race like this. I mean, even a small shift in voter turnout, could determine the outcome.
Yeah. It's a good reminder that we can't take anything for granted in this election. I mean, this is this is an unpredictable election. And the results in Iowa could have ripple effects far beyond the state itself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And as we move closer to Election Day, I think it's more important than ever to, stay informed, engage in, thoughtful discussions, and really consider the broader implications of these political trends. What do they mean for the future?
Yeah, it feels like we're at a turning point. You know what I mean?
Oh, for sure.
I mean, if Iowa, a state that has, that's been a Republican stronghold for so long, if they're now genuinely, in play,
right,
makes you wonder what other surprises might be, in store as we head towards November.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. This election cycle has just been so unpredictable,
Yeah.
And remember, we're just talking about Iowa, zoom out. Imagine the potential ripple effects if similar trends, are playing out in other states that have traditionally been, red or blue.
Yeah, it's kind of mind-boggling, right? Could this be a sign of, a larger political realignment?
It's a good question, isn't it?
Yeah, are we seeing a shift in the balance of power that extends beyond just this election?
Well, and honestly, we won't know for sure until all the votes are counted. But what we can say for certain is that this election has, it's shattered a lot of our preconceived notions about the electorate.
Right, the idea that voters are just neatly divided along party lines. I mean, we've seen examples of lifelong Republicans like Ralph Eubanks who are choosing to vote for Harris.
Right.
And we've also seen, a significant number of independent voters who are shifting their allegiances. Yeah,
it's fascinating. It's not just this simple, us versus them narrative anymore. There's so much nuance.
Right.
So many individual stories, so many different motivations that are driving these trends.
And that's something I think that we lose sight of, when we're just bombarded with headlines and polls. It's easy to forget that behind each statistic is a real person.
Yeah, with their own hopes, their own fears. Absolutely.
Who's grappling with real issues. So if we zoom out for a second and look at, the bigger picture, what are the key takeaways from this deep dive into the Iowa polls? What should our listener be thinking about as we head into, these last few weeks before the election?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that this election is far from over.
Right.
I mean, we are witnessing a level of, unpredictability and volatility that we haven't seen in a long time.
It's a reminder that we can't be complacent. We can't assume that things are going to unfold according to some, traditional pattern.
Right, exactly. The old rules they don't apply anymore.
Yeah.
And we need to be ready for the unexpected.
Okay, so any final thoughts for our listeners? What's the one thing you want them to take away from this conversation?
Stay engaged, stay informed, and stay curious.
Okay.
Don't let all the noise and chaos of the news cycle, drown out your own critical thinking. This is a pivotal moment in our history.
Yeah.
And the choices that we make now, they're going to have consequences for years to come.
Well said. And on that note, that's a wrap on our deep dive into the wild world of election predictions.
For sure.
Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.